Okay, so welcome everybody to this week's call with Dr. Joseph Ahrens, a dual-nominated Nobel Prize scientist, and certainly has become very much a friend to all of us in our living rooms, and also into being able to meet him from time to time over the last 4.5 years. But today's call, we are looking at the truth and the myth about fats in our diets. And I'm going to be really intrigued as to how many people take notes. And as we go through this, as to, you know, if you're honest with yourself, do you really know how many fats that you are consuming each day in our diet? So as we go forward, first of all, I want to welcome our host. So how are you, Dr. Ahrens?
I'm great. I'm really glad to be here. You know, we talk a lot about some products like inulin here, but actually what I'm really wanting this site to be is a place where people can come to get real information. And everything we talk about here on these Zoom calls, we want to eventually get over into the print side, and particularly our Facebook chats, that so people can come and see references. So, you know, we're not going to particularly talk about products right now unless somebody has some questions later on. But we want to say, you know, where can you come to know the truth about your diet? And eventually we're going to be talking about exercise and what's the appropriate type and amount for who you are, what is in your diet, what do calories mean, cholesterol, fats, protein, you name it. So we're going to kick off today by talking about fats.
Okay, so we've got a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll bring that up so we can get started there. Just make sure we've got people muted. Where has it disappeared to? All right, so are you able to see that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so you just tell me when you want to go next. So obviously this is what we're talking about today. And I shall shift on to the next slide so you can fire away.
Well, you know, fats and cholesterol go hand in hand in their effects on the body, pro and con, but we're really going to focus on fats because we just don't have enough time. We could spend hours and hours on this subject, but we're just going to right now do some bases of fats, and then we'll come back next time and maybe talk about cholesterol. So let's go on. So, you know, fats, first of all, fat and oil. Look in that picture. You got some oil there. The only difference between a fat and oil is if they're solid at room temperature. So wherever you happen to live, if it's solid, it's a fat, and if it's liquid still, it's called an oil, but fat. And then fats are composed of fatty acids. You don't need to know the chemical structure of those, but people talk about fatty acids, they're talking about fats, they're talking about oils. And there's a few different types of fats that you need to be aware of. So we're going to start off by talking about monounsaturated fats, which is also called MUFA, monounsaturated unsaturated fats. So look at this picture here. You know, I got salmon there and avocado and a bunch of different nuts and olive oil, in particular flax seeds. These are monounsaturated. They're very good for you. You should consume as many as you can. And the idea is that you have more of the better ones, and some are not so good for you. But the monos, you look on the monos, and some labels in some countries have the food split down into how many mono and how many polys, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But look at those. Those are always the standard. Avocados, salmon. Salmon's a great fish. It's not very fatty. It contains quite a bit of monounsaturated fats. Again, you don't need to know what that means. Maybe we'll put that in a circular later on. You'll hear that though, MUFA. Let's go to the next. Polyunsaturated. So this means more than that one single unsaturated site. Well, you got a lot of the same things here, almost the same things: avocado, salmon, olive oil, some flax seeds. Well, you know, salmon and avocado examples, they contain both. So there are no such thing as any particular plant or animal that has just one or the other. Some have more than one than the other, and some have an equal amount. Actually, for instance, salmon, it has in a serving about the size of your hand, it has almost equal amounts of monounsaturated and polyunsaturated and saturated fats. It's good for you across the board. So if you start trying to say, okay, I'm going to eat this and not that, well, really what you should do is try to avoid the bad ones. And there's really only one really booger in this whole equation. Let's go on to the next one. Here we have saturated fats. Well, it's the same group. Look at that. There's the avocado, there's the oil, there's the salmon again, but now we've also brought in animal products, cheeses, chicken, looks like beef down there, still the same nut. So what I'm saying to you is they all contain all of it. And the myth is on saturated fats, which we'll get to in just a minute, but I want to point that out to you again. Most of our food contains all of the different types of fats. Some have more than others, but saturated fats come from animals. So if you're a vegan, you probably don't have to worry about this, but if you are not, and you've heard saturated fats are no good, we'll find out. Let's go to the next. All right, trans fats. Well, this is a picture of a desert because nothing naturally contains a trans fat. It is not natural. It's never existed. And here is a picture of all those food products, natural food products that contain trans fats. None. Next slide. Here's what contains trans fats. It's basically vegetable oil. You take oil out of vegetables and then you bombard it with a bunch of hydrogen and it turns into trans fats. They will kill you. There's no place in the diet, in any animal's diet, for a trans fat. The only reason it's there is it has great texture and it tastes delicious. Okay, that's it, you know? It tastes delicious. That's why we have it. That's why French fries, chips, they taste so good. They're usually cooked in trans fats. Fried chicken, all kinds of fried meat. Look here, it's put into flour to make bread. And this is where you will find it. When you go and buy bread in a store and you buy prepared foods, it's full of trans fats because it is cheap, it fries perfectly, and it tastes great, and it will kill you. So if you want, you need to eliminate processed food. You know, I'll have a piece of bread that's got this in there. I will eat the occasional cake. It's not only got trans fats, but it's got processed sugar. You know, I've told several of you many times, I try to stay at the 80-20 rule. You know, I'm a good boy for 4 out of 5 days, and then one day I'll go ahead and have some French fries or something. Well, you know, that's better than nothing. But we used to eat trans fats all the time. And Crisco is in the US is a most popular brand, and people have backed away from it. McDonald's no longer cooks their French fries in trans fats. It is a big health issue. There are lots of scientific literature that says this stuff has no positive advantage in your diet. It only contributes calories and heart attacks. Let's go on. So where are we today? What are the recommendations on fats in your diet? And remember, we have these monos, these polys, we've got saturated, and we've got trans. So I'll tell you, stay away from trans. Everyone agrees, almost everyone, trans fats are bad for you. But we had the first recommendation on fats. Lipid is another word for fats, blood lipids. That means the blood in the fat. Blood lipids and human hardening of the arteries. That's what that means. Blood fats and human hardening the arteries. And back in 1950, this was actually the first report that came out that linked any problem with fats with the diet. The first one, 1950. And they made a recommendation. Let's go to the next one. They said, you know, it appears that cholesterol and fats are related to heart events. They didn't know exactly what it was, but they thought that people had more heart attacks and death when they had high cholesterol and high fats. Well, it was very early primitive chemistry. We actually did not know how to separate out the different types of fats. We did not know about high density lipoproteins, the good cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. It was a very good effort, but this was the very first time that scientists came out saying there is some link. And so people, you know, this is after World War II, we're trying to get the whole world going again and looking at good nutrition, and people starting to latch on to this idea that maybe fats and cholesterol are bad for you. Let's go to the next one. And so this is the second study that started. It actually started in the 1950s and the first report to come out of this science was in the 70s. So this took 20 years. This guy, Ansel Keys, he was the first one that looked at different diets and looked at how much fat and cholesterol were in those diets and tried to relate it to the health outcome. That was very noble in itself. He tried to link diet to health outcomes. Believe it or not, before this time, we didn't understand the effect of diet on your overall healthy lifestyle. We knew things about some vitamins, but we had no idea about protein and cholesterol and fats and vegetables and stuff. Let's go to the next one. So he came out with the 7 countries study, and it showed in this published work, it was actually published in 1978, that if you had a diet with saturated fat and high cholesterol, you'll have more heart attacks. Well, we got a couple of problems with this. I've got here on the title saying 7 country study, 7 versus 21. He had some political motives to do this. He was actually vying to be president of the American Heart Association. In reality, his data showed 21 countries, but he chose 7 countries that proved his point. If you go back and add all 21 countries into the study, the data is totally inconclusive and there is no link. Now, I invite all of you to look this up. You can look it on Wikipedia. Just look up 7 countries study, and it will tell you everything you want to know about this. And then all the subsequent literature is included. So Wikipedia is the place to start. It's not the place that you should get your final information, but it does have in this article, a very important listing of all the pros and cons of this study. And I encourage each one of you to look this up, 7 countries study. Next slide, please. Well, here it is. Adele Height and her research group. This is, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. Her group came out and said, wait a second. We've looked at the data. We've looked at Ansel's work, Key's work. We've looked at several other studies, and there's contradictory evidence here. And they put out this report of contrasting the current recommendations in America, and it's also the same in Australia and Europe, and the whole world actually ended up with the same rules. The guidelines are that you should avoid saturated fats and you should eat more refined grains. Let's go to the next slide. So she said the current recommendations has no basis in science. This is 10 years ago. There's no evidence that an increase in grains and decrease in fats lead to positive health benefits. Let's repeat that. There's no benefit to switching into more refined carbohydrates, refined grains, and decreasing your fats to make you more healthy. She strongly advises to reevaluate how guidelines are determined. Okay, we can read between the lines here. How are guidelines determined? Well, large agricultural companies contribute to research programs and take people from regulatory agencies out to dinner, and they amazingly their recommendations come out back to support those large companies. That's really what happens, and I think it is an absolute crime that some of these in the U.S., it's the U.S. Department of Agriculture, have made recommendations that actually end up killing people. An increase in refined carbohydrates, and a decrease in saturated fats leads to death. And so she couldn't say that in a paper like that. So she just said, we strongly advise to reevaluate how guidelines are determined. Next slide. So let us ourselves, I'll walk you through some 5 major studies. Let's look at the data ourselves. And this is actually what I do for a living. I look at the science. I want to find out if it's real or not. And we're going to look at it tonight. So here is a paper, Reduced or Modified Dietary Fat for Preventing Cardiovascular Disease. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Let's reduce your fat and prevent heart disease. This was done by Hooper and his group. What did they find out? They went to find out if reducing or modifying your dietary fat can prevent heart disease. Let's go to the next slide. Here's what that paper was. 15 studies they looked at. 15. There were 59,000 individuals in these 15 studies, and it lasted for 2 years. Here was their conclusion. Saturated fat has no significant effects on heart attacks, strokes, or dying from any cause. They had to say it. That was what the data showed. Next. Here's another study. Intake of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids, that just means fats, like I told you, and risk of all-cause mortality, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. So they actually threw in type 2 diabetes here and threw in a study on trans. So let's go to the next slide. What did this study show? 73 studies, 339,000 individuals. These are all review articles. So you've got scientists doing work all over the planet, like 73 studies, all these individuals, and now this group, D'Souza's group, looks at all those studies and does an overall analysis. And what they found, no link between saturated fat and diabetes, stroke, heart attack, or dying from any cause. Next slide. Here's another paper. Siri Torino, her group looked at meta-analysis. That means looking at all of these studies of prospective cohort studies. That means studies that are going on at the same time with the same type of results, evaluating the association of saturated fat with cardiovascular disease, with heart and vessel disease. What did they find out? Next slide. Well, these studies lasted between 5 and 23 years. 348,000 individuals. Look, this is very significant. This isn't looking at 10 people, 50 people, 100 people. This is looking at studies all over the world. And these are all different studies. These 5 papers I'm showing you. Now we're talking about millions of people. What did they find out? No link between saturated fat intake and heart disease or diabetes. Next slide. And here's Chowdhury's group. They looked at association of not just the fatty acids that you eat, but they looked at the amount of fat that was actually in your blood, the circulating fatty acids, and the supplement fatty acids, the one you take it on, with coronary risk. That means heart disease, a systematic review and meta-analysis. That means looking at all the studies at one time. Let's look at that. What did they find out? Next slide. 49 studies in this case, 550,000 individuals. Now with these 5 studies, we're into 3 million people. 27, and then separately, another look at 27 studies with 100,000 individuals. What did they find out? No link between saturated fat and heart disease or death. And that death is from any cause, so not just looking at heart disease. Did they die from any cause at all? Is there any link at all? No. Next slide. So we have our last one we're looking at here. And also, I would like to say that these are all published scientific literature in peer-reviewed journals. This is food nutrition research. Those others were nutrition journal of nutrition, very top-end studies. So what did they find out? 607 studies. Reducing saturated fat intake has no effect on heart disease or death. And if you replace saturated fat with refined carbohydrates, you increase risk of heart disease. This is what I said, it's criminal. I know I get kind of worked up over this, but the USDA recommendation has increased carbohydrates and decreased saturated fats, and that has led to heart disease and death. Next. So I hope you've enjoyed this really brief excursion. There you go. There you are.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if anybody would like to, I'm going to actually try and get Dr. Ron Borsima Sr. to unmute himself and just give his thoughts here with you, Dr. Ahrens, because this is an area of passion for him also.
Kind of very good presentation. It kind of reminds me of seeing the food pyramid that we were brought into back at that time, with the carbs at the bottom and everything else going up, and how totally upside down that pyramid is. And you're right, I get as angry about the damage that it's done to millions and millions of people around the world. And it's just sad and it's outrageous. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess we know who's behind it. And we just need to be out there and make the changes we can do.
Well, Ron, I have gone into doctors' offices, all types of doctors, and showed them this data. And, you know, they're too busy. They can't stop and listen. Because look, you know, they can't even take the 10 or 15 minutes of this talk. And they say, look at what the USDA says. Look what the European Department of Agriculture says. Look at what the Australian food health and safety laws say. Surely they wouldn't be wrong. And that's just right there, a bunch of bullshit. And I have stood up against threatened lawsuits over this. I said, you know, you guys, it's criminal. And then they, of course, go and the secretaries come out and they're gone. It's criminal. But it doesn't take that much. You know, if you're a scientist, well, actually, most medical doctors are not scientists. They're just glorified extension agents. And they read what the drug companies give them. They read what, you know, I want to just mention names of companies, and I just can't do it because they'll be on me like stink on something. So large companies, the ones you all know, fight this because you're exactly right. Why is the food pyramid upside down? Because the grain industry in the US is more powerful than the food industry. I mean, you know, farmers are not farmers. People that are farming sheep and things that are probably good, and fish farmers, they have so much small political power compared to the mega companies. And I'm not against companies, man. I love industry and commercial enterprise. I do. It's done a lot for us. But, you know, it's just like our politicians. They're out after themselves, and that's all they're for. And they want power. They want to make their companies a lot of money. And so they get with our officials and they wine and dine them. I mean, I've seen it happen. I mean, I was part of that deal. I was in the University of California, Davis, I'll say, the premier agriculture industry, and all the time people coming through there making sure I didn't say the wrong thing, Oh, don't mention that stuff. And we've all heard of, and it's like the tobacco, it's just like the tobacco industry, just like it. So that's their lifeblood. I don't blame them, but we don't have the officials that put the pyramid together. They're the ones that are at fault. And so we have the biggest part you should take is grains, refined grains. And, and then fruits and vegetables, and then some meat. And then at the top, they're still recommending trans fats in the diet to this very day. The top of the pyramid has trans fats on top of it. There's no place for that. And the only reason it's there is because the makers of the trans fats have pressured them to leave it in a little bit. Yeah, I could go on along like that. And then cholesterol, that's going to be another topic for it. It's the same way, cholesterol. I'll say this, there's no heart event that has been associated with high cholesterol. It's driven by the manufacturers of the most famous #1 drug sold in the world, which may or may not begin with an L. So that's what drives this whole deal. And I think, and yours is the same, doctor, is that you just need to eat a healthy diet if you can. And sometimes you can't. You do need to supplement yourself on occasion with vitamin B and vitamin D and vitamin C and I think and flavonoids. Avoid those refined carbs. Even the ones that aren't refined are not that much better for you. There's a place for all of this in your diet, but don't be misled for someone saying these are bad. And furthermore, some of the fats and oils like uttering coconut, they are very beneficial to you. The mid-chain fatty acids, that means the ones that are short, they're not real short. They're not, it's like the three bears, right? There's one that's just right. The mid-chain fatty acids, they are extremely healthy for you. They protect your heart, and they actually help with things like epilepsy and Alzheimer's. And we're told to avoid them. Avoid them.
Yeah, they unfortunately, they lump all fats into one category for the most part, and we're told to stay away from fats, and that's burned into our hard drives ever since television commercials started when I was a child in the 50s. It's all about re-educating you or indoctrinating you to think their way, because that'll help the pharmaceutical companies get more clients. And we're trying to reverse it, but it's so hard because they'll always say to me, well, where's your medical degree? What do you know? I said, well, probably a whole lot more than your medical doctor knows, because he has studied almost no nutrition whatsoever. And then if he has studied it, he studied it from a perspective of the food pyramid.
Yes, because, they wouldn't tell us that stuff if it was wrong. Oh, that's just baloney. They will absolutely do it. And, I'm not against drugs or anything like that. I'm not. There's a place for all of it. What we want is the truth. And I'm hoping that we are going to bring that out on this call and others like that. And boy, I'm telling you, these commercials that you studied as a kid, that was some time ago. You probably had to watch television by candlelight, didn't you?
We did. And it was about 9 inches small, and Howdy Doody was the only one on there.
Okay, Jackie.
Just for the record, I didn't have to watch television by candlelight, just quietly just saying. Look, I do want to ask you a question, Dr. Ahrens, and thank you, Dr. Ron Borsima Senior, sorry, for being able to put your input in there. And whilst we're not talking about product, Dr. Ahrens, I do want to ask you one question, and if you can just give us a short summary. We all know that everybody needs amylin from the time that they take their first breath to the time that they take their last. We know that it assists and supports to help manage symptoms, but how can it help, in your thoughts, briefly overview in regards to helping us to reduce the fats in our diets or help to process, more efficiently?
Well, it's helped to process. So first of all, you need to eat a good balanced diet, and that is a good word, but balance doesn't mean the food pyramid. So you got all that carbs on the bottom and then move up to, it's better than it used to be, but it's still so far away where it needs to be. I think we probably should get rid of the pyramid and make a completely different structure. So what happens when you have the flavonoids is they help things like fats, cholesterol, and sugar get to where they need to go and stay away from they should. They produce a very healthy environment for your whole heart system and the epithelial lining inside your body. And you're already eating too many refined sugars. And the refined sugars is really the underlying culprit. I mean, I wish I could get away from the fats and the cholesterol. The underlying problem is we still are taking too many refined sugars. This results in inflammation throughout your circulatory system. You could cut open your arteries and see it. It looks burn up. We've had several doctors, cardiovascular surgeons, after being operating for 10, 20, 30 years, saying one day, wait a second, this isn't about fats and stuff and blocked arteries. This is about inflammation. And boy, they were booed right out of their profession. I mean, and they're still suffering for it because they didn't go along with the standard knowledge. You're not supposed to raise your head up out of the trench. You'll get it shot off. So a good diet helps for you to maintain those balances, and you need more flavonoids than we can get through our natural diets. That's unfortunate, but true. So I encourage everyone to supplement themselves. Also, the amounts. Okay, I've said fats are all right. I didn't mean that's the only thing you eat. Don't do that. Don't say that. You should eat a lot of fruits and vegetables. A lot of them. You can't eat too many of those. It not only has good vitamins, and that's where you will get the emulin-like products, the flavonoids out of there. That's the color in all these vegetables. You get all the vitamins. You also get the roughage you need, the dietary fiber that maintains your digestive system. After that, then you should take protein, whether you decide to take animal protein or not. We'll have another show on that. Take that secondly, and then thirdly, you can fill in with the starchy material, such as if you on occasion want to eat potatoes and rice, but go for the fruits and vegetables, then add some protein, and then finally top it off with some carbohydrates, but they should not be refined. They should be in their native state as much as possible. Plenty of carrots, green beans with all, those are, carbohydrates, all in that luscious green. They're delicious. Asparagus, a lot of carbohydrates. Take them in their natural state. Don't have them in a refined form. Don't add sugar to your food. Try to look at those labels that we talked about a couple of weeks ago and avoid sugar added. Keep the sugar down as much as possible.
Dr. Ahrens, I've got to say, for me personally, and I know each and everyone that's on this call, the knowledge that you've shared with us today has been invaluable. And as I said, we are students of life and we constantly keep on learning. So I really want to thank you so much. I want to thank Ron for having his input in there as well. And I'd like to finish the call on the recording. So I do thank you so much. And we look forward to having you join us next week as well.
Thank you very much. I'm always glad to be here. Thank you for coming up. Thank you for joining.